Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Chilling Reign, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, myself and Jack are back talking about all the interesting V and VMAX cards coming out of Chilling Reign. Typically, these are the flagship cards of any set, and this one is no different. We have some really exciting stuff to go over, so let's jump straight into it.
As per usual, we have the rating system as well as the community ratings in the top right-hand corner, so you can see our rating on the right and then the community rating that was done over on the Google Docs. As per usual, we do this every set, so make sure you keep an eye out for when Evolving Skies comes out to take part next time. First off, we have Celebi V and VMAX. This is the first of a couple of VMAXs we're going to be looking at. First off, the Celebi V, 190 HP, Leaflet Dance for 1 grass, lets you attach any number of grass energy from your hand to your Pokemon in any way you like. Decent acceleration, but when you think about it, we have Cherim, so we kind of have this effect that outside of an attack. Obviously, this is a little bit different. This can go to multiple prizes, but really nothing too good to write home about. Also has the Slash Back attack for 60 damage. That lets you switch with one of the bench. Again, decent for protecting yourself, but really nothing too amazing. The VMAX itself has Curative Forest, and this is honestly one of the interesting parts about the card. Once during a turn, you may heal 20 damage from each of your grass Pokemon. That's, if you have 2 or 3 Celebi VMAXs out, that's a lot of healing per turn from all of your grass types. But when you consider we actually have Milotic in format already, which is essentially it's stage 1, which is basically what Celebi VMAX is, that heals all of your Pokemon, not just grass types. But seeing no play, you can already see that this kind of ability is very flashy, but doesn't really get much done. Max Plant is Celebi VMAX's attack for 2 energy, does 130. Search your deck for up to 2 Pokemon, reveal them, and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. So this is very comparable to something like a Togekiss V, which does 120 for 2, and lets you search for 2 Pokemon, search for any 2 cards. Immediately, you can see this is a little bit more limiting, especially given that Pokemon are way more specific. Even if it was trainers, you're typically going to be grabbing trainers from Togekiss in most scenarios anyway. But Pokemon is really, really limiting. Maybe you're going to want another Celebi V or VMAX to start setting another one up. But in general, the attack is just very, very underwhelming. Support-wise, we do have things like Turffield to try and kind of smooth the deck out and get these Celebis out fairly consistently. But Orbeetle, I think, in most senses of the card, is just a better card. It's got a better damage output, way more scalable, actually can hit some pretty scary numbers. That Aerial Beam ability we've seen can be pretty detrimental to certain decks. And, there's no real reason to be playing quite a limiting attack, especially when 130 damage just isn't what it used to be. You're going to be 3-shotting a lot of Pokemon. Yes, you can be tanking, healing in between that, but any fire deck, you're already going to be pretty sad to see. And to be honest, with the Curative Forest, you're still not going to be getting out of range of things like Zacians hitting into you twice. You're going to need a lot of Curative Forest abilities going on. So Celebi just kind of doesn't really do the defensive thing very well and doesn't really do the aggressive thing very well, and as such just falls short, unfortunately.
Next up we have Blaziken V and VMAX, a fire-type rapid striker, starting off with the basic 210 hit points, isn't too shabby. It has the high jump kick attack, which can be fulfilled just with 1 rapid strike energy because it is just 2 colorless. You do a vanilla 50, which isn't ideal, but it can knock out Jirachis, so a small note there. And it also has the fire spin attack for 2 fire and 2 colorless. You do 210 damage and discard 2 energy from this Pokemon. It's actually going to be very rare that you get to use this unless you are trying to play Blaziken with Welder as well as things like Rapid Strike Energy and really leaning into this build. But we're more so expecting to try and use the VMAX here and really lean on the Max Blaze attack, which does 130 damage for 2 colorless and allows you to choose up to 2 of your benched Rapid Strike Pokemon and attach an energy card from your discard pile to each of them. Now this states energy card, not just basic. That means we can reload Rapid Strike energy, maybe even the new special energy that we're getting in this set as well, which is the main appeal for the Blaziken here. This is going to be your turn 2 play, putting a decent amount of pressure onto the active Pokemon. Obviously that fire typing helps out, especially if you are hitting into Zacians or into Mawile, something like that, or Eldegoss. But really you're peppering things up to then have more scary and more threatening rapid strikers on the bench, be it an Urshifu that you're trying to VMAX, or Zeraora, which can try and come in and do aggressive sniping damage as well. we're only giving it the 3-star despite the amazing acceleration that this card provides, because it's still a little bit on the slower tempo side, and quite often if you're trying to power up something like a Zeraora, it can quite easily be countered by boss's orders where they just deal with the bigger threats. Then you're left using Blaziken to only do 130 the following turn, which, you know, we're in a 3-shot game against opposing VMAXs. We're not even 2-shotting a number of tag teams without extra modifiers, so that's pretty awkward overall, and that's really why we're only going to be putting it the 3-star. The reason we're giving it that benefit of the doubt is that its type coverage is still good, and it is still very, very interesting energy acceleration, and there's a backdoor option of trying to build a Cheryl approach here as well with Blaziken, similar to how we've seen it with Center Scorch when Sander built a controlling variant, as well as Snorlax more recently with Pidgeotos and Munchlax as well, trying to like power pad that Cheryl over and over again. Blaziken could be that option as you literally try and dance between a couple of these VMAXs, paying retreat out of the one that's just taken damage, Cheryling that off and then reattaching with the Max Blaze. So there are a few avenues here. We don't think that right now either of them quite reach the top tier though.
Next up, we have Volcanion V. Volcanion V is a single strike Pokemon with 220 HP, so pretty chunky for a basic V. With the Heat Blast attack for 50 for 2, again, nothing too exciting. Dynamite Tackle for 2 fire energy, and a Colorless does 100 damage. And if this Pokemon has 10 or more damage counters on it, this attack does 150 more damage. So 250 for 3 is actually pretty respectable, especially on a basic that can be accelerated by Welder. And also, you can buff that damage up even more with a single strike energy. Obviously, you can't use single strike to fulfill the fire cost, but you can use it for that colorless cost, which is going to push to 270. 270 is, like I said, a pretty scary number. It's knocking out tag teams, or most tag teams, which is pretty impressive. Obviously, the downside is you need to have 10 damage counters on you. And typically, if a 220 HP Pokemon is going to be taking damage, it's going to very rarely be in the range where they've taken 10 damage counters and haven't been knocked out. That's where things like Cape of Toughness and the new Toughness boost Abomasnow are going to help out. Both of these cards actually buff your HP by 50. So you can push Volcanion up to 320 HP, and then all of a sudden you are going to be living a lot more hits, and you are going to be able to activate that bonus damage on Dynamite Tackle. But we just think the card it's so convoluted to try and get this combo off. You're having to play things like Cape of Toughness that can just be scrappered or jammered off. You're having to play Abomasnows, and Abomasnow outside of its ability really isn't doing much. If you only have the Abomasnow, you're up to 270, which in all fairness is pretty scary on a 2-prize Pokemon, but equally we've seen a lot of Pokemon can reach that number pretty inconsequentially at the moment. And all for just knocking out tag teams. The more we move into a VMAX meta, this is still going to be 2-shotting VMAXs, and there are a lot of VMAXs out there that are just going to be 1-shotting you back. We're also moving into a meta where water seems actually very, very good. There's a couple of interesting water decks, whether it be new attackers or just the Melanie engine in general. So that already means that you're a lot weaker defensively against a number of decks that seem to be coming into this meta. So all of these things, whilst Volcanion is a very, very flashy card, all of these things really just don't line up very well for it, and unfortunately it falls short a little bit in terms of being a basic that can just kind of compete with these tag teams.
On to some of those interesting water types, and we actually have Ice Rider Calyrex V and VMAX, one of the poster boys of the set. The regular Ice Rider V has 210 hit points. It's a water type, does have a very awkward weakness to metal, as does the VMAX. These are some of the main limiting factors here, but it does still carry a couple decent attacks. Pierce can just do a 40 damage prod, and you also have the Glacial Lance that can discard 2 water and deal 200 damage for the cost of water colorless. You can do this on turn 2 if you weave in a Melanie supporter, of course, trying to accelerate that attack. So it could be an easy way for you to get through some like 2-prize bench sitters and stuff like that without committing to a 3-prize Pokemon, which can be reasonable if you've happened to like take a hit or something in the opening stages, or if you're trying to skew that prize trade in the mid to late game. But really, it's that launch pad, as we see with most Vs, into the VMAX, where we gain up to 320 hit points, and we carry 2 attacks. The first, for 2 colorless energies, is Ride of the High King. You do 10 plus 30 more for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon, so it's essentially a Mind Jack attack that we've seen on plenty of successful cards in the past. You can foresee this doing around like the 100 mark and going much higher when they have a full board, and you can even get into 2-shot range on tag team Pokemon, which is really nice. And you can be finishing off even VMAXs after or before using the Max Lance attack as well, which also has that 10 baseline, but does 120 more for each energy card you discard from this Pokemon, up to 2. So you can do a maximum of 250 damage here. 250, just shy of Tag Team GXs, but we can potentially be having some damage mods here. If we're playing like a Jirachi, we could have Zigzagoon Scoop Up Net, or if we're playing an Inteleon package, we could try and have the new Rapid Strike Inteleon that we'll mention later on, but essentially it gives you additional damage counters to play with. So this actually is very, very dangerous going into tag team matches, and I also think it has a very similar approach to Victini VMAX, where going first against an Ice Rider is extremely intimidating, even if they just put down one energy card on their Ice Rider V, because the following turn they could be threatening that boss's orders. We are so terrified of Victini decks just hitting the boss's orders on your Eternatus or on your Urshifu, taking those 2 prizes, taking energy off the board and those sorts of things. In these VMAX mirror matches, an Ice Rider has that high tempo option to it. Of course, when you are discarding those 2 waters, you can try and reload all in one turn with the help of a manual attachment plus that Melanie as well. So I imagine that's always going to be the core. Potentially we will see builds similar to Victini VMAX already, where you have a bunch of Dedenes, Crobats, Jirachis, just so that you can be using either Melanie or Boss on either turn, which is kind of what Victini tries to do quite often, with the Welder, of course. Or we could be trying some disruptive approaches, leaning into that Inteleon package, which gives you damage output, but also pushes you away from the need to use Dedenne and Crobat, allows you to have Shady Dealings as your engine, and then you can play things like Path of the Peak to slow opposing decks down that little bit more and become a problem in a different respect. In the same vein, you could try something like Cincino at the same time. That gives you extra discard synergy for water energies to make sure Melanie is online as quickly as possible, whilst also giving you card advantage outside of using Dedenne and Crobat. So definitely some good avenues here. It's low maintenance, and its damage output is definitely threatening, certainly high tempo at the very least. The only reason we're not pushing it all the way to that 5-star is, of course, it's limited to its metal weakness. And just like some of the Welder decks, this Melanie engine, at times you're only drawing those 3 cards, and sometimes you need to push for multiple things turn by turn. So if you are churning out multiple Max Lances, it can catch up to you later on in the game, which could mean you could stumble at different points. So yeah, lots to take in here with the Ice Rider. And one other thing I will say, as soon as people see that metal weakness, they're immediately pushed away from this sort of archetype. But let's face it, like, all the top decks right now have really awkward weaknesses. Urshifu is dodging and weaving, Eternatus is dodging and weaving, Shadow Rider is dodging and weaving, so Calyrex, it's no different for this sort of archetype, so don't write it off straight away, because it still can really pack a punch in a lot of different aspects.
Next up, we have Zeraora V. It's a card we've already alluded to. It's another Rapid Strike V Pokemon with 210 HP. A Lightning type with the Cross Fist attack. Cross Fist for 1 Lightning and 2 colorless, does 100 damage. And if one of your other Rapid Strike Pokemon uses an attack during your last turn, this attack also does 160 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. The first thing we'll say is you cannot use the same Zeraora twice, so it does quite literally have to be another Pokemon card that is a Rapid Strike Pokemon. That's why Boss's Orders is actually going to be one of the best counters to Zeraora, because if you only have a couple of, or if you only have 2 Rapid Strikes out, as long as you can deal with the Rapid Strike that didn't attack last turn, even switching out to the bench will not reset or will not proc Cross Fist's bonus damage. So that's one thing immediately just to remember in terms of how to activate this effect, because it's really unique. It's one that we haven't really seen before. So just keep that in mind when we're discussing the card. First things first, 160 damage snipe is absolutely insane. We've seen Cramorant used for basically essentially just that. Cramorant obviously also has the additional beat catch attack, but typically people are just running Cramorant in Welder-based decks to be able to snipe the Dedenes to finish off the game in a lot of cases. So we already know 160 snipe is very strong. On top of that, we're getting an extra 100 damage, which is fantastic. So we're doing 260 damage base, but then we have things like Telescopic Sight and Persimmon from the set that can actually boost this damage up into 220 with both of those multipliers. And that means you're knocking out a lot of basic V Pokemon. Initially, these kind of snipe attacks have been targeting down to Denes in some very niche circumstances, maybe even peppering up a Crobat here and there to try and take that out. Now we're going to be able to do that very, very easily, especially with how splashable Persimmon is. This 160 damage is going to be 190 in most situations, which is knocking out all Denenes, all Crobats, all Eldergosses, all Oricorios, all of these fantastic bench-saving Pokemon, things like Kricketune as well, all of these are so much less safe than they were when we just had Rapid Strike with Telescopic Sight. That kind of combo was really cute, but very, very inconsistent. Turns out just plopping a Passimian down and having a basic to do the snipe makes these kind of snipe attacks a lot scarier. So there is a lot of reasons to be looking at this card and really worrying about bench management, that kind of thing, because no longer is Dedenne the target. All of a sudden, all of these Pokemon can be targeted now, which is pretty scary. Obviously, typically, these Rapid Strike decks haven't run Lightning Energy. We have on the channel tried, discussed, and both really like the Tapu Koko engine within Rapid Strike to try and chain 2 G-Max Rapid Flows to after turn, being able to use the Rapid Strike energy and then the Koko. Once you've used 1 G-Max Rapid Flow to be able to get another one going immediately, that leans into this really well because even similarly, Zeraora's cost can be fulfilled with 1 Lightning Energy plus a Rapid Strike energy. So we could see maybe Rapid Strike Urshifu builds go back towards or more towards the Tapu Koko style build to try and lean into the Zeraora. Similarly, as we mentioned with Blaziken, Blaziken could be the new way to play these Rapid Strike decks, and maybe we move away from Urshifu completely and just kind of set up 2 or 3 Zeraoras on the bench with Blaziken, and then just try and chain Cross Fists 2 turns in a row to just put so many damage counters on the board that no one can really compete. Obviously, that would be a pretty significant change from Rapid Strike being the Rapid Strike archetype of choice, and I think that's probably not going to be where we go with this, but typically you can just see how strong this kind of effect is and how splashable it is. We're not certain that it will be the best way to play Rapid Strike. We're pretty certain that Rapid Strike is going to be a fantastic deck come this new set's release, but we're not certain it's going to be the way to play Rapid Strike. We think it could be a very strong way, but it may just go back to things like Cincino or Jirachi and just playing hyper-consistent Rapid Strike Urshifu. Because Passimian is released, Rapid Strike alone just gets a buff, so it kind of maybe doesn't even need this card to be able to just be an oppressive threat compared to what it used to be. All of a sudden, having Passimian and Telescopic Sight without the Zeraora may just be enough. So that's why we haven't quite pushed it up to 5. Similarly, obviously, the awkwardness of being able to play around the attack's effect with Boss means that you have to set up multiple of these, and that can sometimes prove difficult. You can just have the chain broken, and all of a sudden you're doing 100 to the active. And really, that active damage is almost inconsequential. There'll be certain situations where you will be taking a prize, or maybe you'll be taking out a 1-prizer, a Jirachi or a Mew or something like that. But typically, the Cross Fist 100 damage into the active is almost irrelevant because that 160 damage is really where we're going to be leaning into this attack. But Gale Thrust and Max Blaze, things like that, don't quite reach the KO mark, so maybe you will be able to take multiple prizes with Cross Fist as well. But yeah, in general, the more support Rapid Strike gets, obviously this is another fantastic way to play it. The scary thing about Rapid Strike in general is just the oppression of Passimian being in the format is probably going to push Mew into even more decks. Mew was already a staple in a lot of different decks, and it seems to not be going anywhere. Mew can still help the prize matchup in certain situations, but a well-timed Mew, especially on a turn where you're really setting up for a sniping attack, can just be backbreaking for a Rapid Strike player if it's not benched too early, something like that. And similarly, Zeraora falls into that same camp. So as long as Rapid Strike is doing well, Mew will do well, and therefore Zeraora's capabilities will be limited. But that being said, the amount of output this card has, and given that we can actually foresee a potentially new Rapid Strike variant coming out of it, we couldn't rate it any lower than a 4, really. We couldn't rate it a 5 just because of, like you say, there are some scary limitations to the card, Boss in particular. But in general, the amount of sheer aggression from this card is honestly something we've never seen before. I think a lot of people were pretty convinced Rapid Strike was one of the best snipers of all time. This is very, very similar. It's another fantastic sniping Pokemon, and it certainly will be meta warping to some extent.
Onto some of the psychic types then. We're starting off with Galarian Articuno V. It has an ability that draws cards, so already it's an interesting prospect. It allows you to draw 1 at the cost of discarding 2, so it's the reverse way round of trade, which is not what you want to do. It's actually card disadvantage. So really, we're thinking about this in terms of discard synergy. What can we try and do to try and either get extra value from these discards or just draw potentially even more cards where you're trying to combine it with like a Kricketune afterwards or something like that. Potentially it could be extra discard fodder for the Mad Party deck. We know that sometimes Mad Partiers even play things like electromagnetic radar just to have extra discard fodder that then could be extra search outs for Dedenne. It could be a math fixer for mustard style builds. This is definitely scraping the barrel at this point. But it also could be a Melanie card, just again, because you are lacking that little bit of extra discard, just relying on things like Quick Ball and Dedenne alone isn't that great. So having the searchable Articuno that allows you to reconstitute and then get the guaranteed Melanie use could be okay. But we think it's not actually worth the board space more often than not. I think usually you'll look for things like Primate Wisdom that can, in theory, let you access an additional card, but also have the value of protecting cards around research and Marnie for the remainder of the game, both on your side and your opponent's side. So we think Primate Wisdom is usually just the better option and is only a single prize Pokemon. If you're looking for 2 prize Pokemon, there's the likes of Kricketune and Oricorio. Obviously, they have less hit points than Articuno and will become relevant with all the Persimmon telescopic combos going around with Rapid Strike going forward, but we still feel like it's just not that useful. It's not very powerful card draw and it's not hand advantage for any means. So really it's very specific to these discard synergy style decks. And firstly, I think Mad Party is becoming less and less relevant as we talk about Ghost Rider very soon. And I feel like it's, not going to make Mustard a much better card either. So ultimately, not great. Of course, its attack is also quite slow. Psychic and do colors, you do 110 and confuse. That's not setting the world alight at all. So yeah, just falling short of the mark, even though it's a Pokemon that can draw cards, which always makes us have to look twice and really think about its usefulness.
Next up, we have Shadow Rider Calyrex, and this, as you can see from the community ratings, is a phenomenally good card. Both of these cards are actually incredibly good. And again, another poster boy of the set. The V is one of these V Pokemon that actually has very good base stats anyway. 210 is great. Weak to Dark is kind of scary, but you'll see this kind of this RPS, Rock, Paper, Scissors style format forming with Psychic, Dark, and Fighting. Shadow Mist for 1 Psychic does 10 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, they can't play any special energy or stadium cards from their hand. This is nothing at all to sniff at, especially with things like Rapid Strike Energy, Single Strike Energy, even things like Aurora Energy, some of the more type-specific ones like Speed and all of these different energy that we're seeing printed at the moment. This can just completely lock all of those off, which can be really annoying because these energy can be the backbone of certain decks, especially things like Rapid Strike Energy. So that's definitely not something to sniff at. Also stops part of the peak going down, which is another really, really important thing to remember because obviously the ability on the Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX would be shut off, so you can kind of prep yourself to at least get 1 turn of Underworld Door to hopefully draw into your Marshadows and that kind of thing. Then Astral Barrage for 3 colorless. Choose 2 of your opponent's Pokemon and put 5 damage counters on each of them. Again, nothing amazing, but the utility of this kind of attack can be really, really good. 1 for setting up benched Pokemon before they come up into the active, but 2 also, Max Geist can sometimes fall ever so slightly short, and this can be a great way, especially with the acceleration of the VMAX in general, for you to just all of a sudden drop a Shadow Rider Calyrex and not need boss because you can just Astral Barrage for KO. Similarly, it's fantastic against all of these 1 prize archetypes. We just mentioned how Mad Party is going to be gatekept pretty much entirely by this because Shadow Mist means they can't play their special energy, and then Astral Barrage can just do absolute bits against all of these low HP Pokemon. So basically the V alone will be pretty much controlling Mad Party's existence, and that's even when we have a Mad Party counter that we're going to talk about in this set, and even this is better than that. So it's kind of crazy how strong the V is alone. Then you look at the VMAX, and you can see we've added Zoroark and Malamar onto the screen, 2 cards that were phenomenal in their time. That's because Underworld Door is kind of a blend of both. Once during a turn, you may attach a Psychic Energy from your hand to one of your benched Psychic Pokemon. If you do attach an energy to a Pokemon in this way, draw 2 cards. So, obviously, similar to Trade, you're having to, quote-unquote, discard a card from your hand to draw 2 cards. However, this is energy acceleration. In certain situations, that's going to be worse. You may, with Trade, you could get N down to 1, and you would always be able to discard. Now you're going to have to draw that specific energy. But on the upside, this is energy acceleration, and energy acceleration is absolutely nuts in this game. Energy acceleration is energy attachment is one thing you can do per turn. With multiple Shadow Rider Calyrexes, you're able to do 2, 3, sometimes even 4 energy attachments per turn, which is fantastic. That's absolutely crazy. You can set up attackers out of nowhere. You can see the plethora of different attackers we've got on the right-hand side of the screen that can just kind of appear out of nowhere with just 1 or 2 Shadow Riders on the field. Also, Shadow Rider itself is a fantastic attacker as well for 3 energy. We have the Max Geist attack that does 10 plus 30 for each psychic energy attached to all of your Pokemon. So basically, you can already see where this is going. You're going to be able to draw a load of cards, attach a load of energy, build up either sort of when you're not going to have enough damage to take a knockout, use something like a Trevnoir or a Gengar Mimikyu to kind of disrupt the opponent. Maybe use a Horror House or a Night Watch to slow them down to the point where you can carry on building this momentum, and then all of a sudden, Max Geist is going to be taking prizes on tag teams, even VMAXs out of nowhere, which is crazy to think about. All of this time, you're actually generating hand advantage as well, so you're able to continually kind of find answers, apply pressure. This is going to be a really, really powerful deck because it can go from defensive in things like Night Watch all the way into sort of aggressive. All of a sudden, you have 2 turns to win the game because otherwise you can't get enough energy off of the board for Max Geist to not be taking prizes. So this deck, this archetype feels like in the click of a switch, it will go from being very, very controlling. We've even seen builds in Japan playing their own Path to the Peak, which is crazy. You play Path to the Peaks and then a very, very heavy Marshadow line to be able to reset the Path to the Peak. So you will, use all of your Underworld Door abilities, play down that path, and then use something like a Night Watch and really put your opponent in a very difficult spot, a low hand size. They can't use their abilities. And then you'll pop with a Marshadow, the Path to the Peak, out of the way, use a load more Underworld Doors, and again, either start taking knockouts with Max Geist or just continue to lock them with Night Watch. So already you can see how this archetype is building a lot of versatility. On top of that, we also get a Cresselia, which is very, very reminiscent of Volcanion, that has seen a lot of play in fire decks. Cresselia lets you search your deck on the first turn if you're going second for 3 psychic energy and attach them to one of your Pokemon. So this kind of lets you mitigate the fact that if you're going second, you have to wait an extra turn to be able to evolve your Shadow Riders. This boosts a load of energy into play for you early, so you can still be really applying pressure with either Max Geist or something like a Night Watch, even if you have to pay that price of going second and having that extra turn of having to wait to evolve. So you can already see that there's so much going for this archetype. We have energy acceleration, we have card advantage, we have the Mewtwo package that can just be slotted in very, very easily. You're already playing psychic energy, so you can even use things like Miraculous Duo, which is as good as it ever has been with all of these 320 HP Pokemon. Now things like Shadow Rider can take a hit. Miraculous Duo, along with the utility of things like Trevnoir and Gengar Mimikyu, can just really mean the deck can do pretty much anything it wants. It's got a plethora of different attacks that are suitable for almost every situation. There's even builds with Alcremie GX, which lets you build a load of energy on the bench and then use something like Gmax Whisk to just completely out of nowhere blow something up. It's the amount of versatility is fantastic. Alcremie, the attacks work so well as well because Alcremie can even use its first attack to attach a load of psychic energy to your Calyrexes to be able to Max Geist later on in the game. So both of these cards actually work weirdly, really synergistically for 2 VMAXs. That's the build we're kind of the least excited about, but Shadow Rider alone kind of carries that archetype as well. So you can see just how strong this card is. We can already see 3 or 4 different builds of this kind of out of the gate being fantastic. Again, another card that's really going to warp the meta. And we're finding, I think, just at the end of Tag Team's sort of release, we're finally going to see a pretty scary Trevnoir kind of partner in Shadow Rider Calyrex, which I think is going to be a very, very formidable deck going forward.
Onto Galarian Zapdos V, potentially part of the toolkit of the Shadow Rider Calyrex, because it's one of the best ways you can easily counter Eternatus VMAX. The Galarian Zapdos is a 200 hit point fighting type that has the ability Fighting Instinct. This Pokemon's attacks cost 1 colorless less for each of your opponent's Pokemon V in play. Eternatus basically can't help putting 2 or 3 V Pokemon in play, so oftentimes Galarian Zapdos with 1 attachment of Aurora Energy can use that Thunderous Kick attack, which typically starts at fighting in 3 colorless, but can easily get reduced down to just that 1 fighting cost. You do 170 damage, which obviously times 2 weaknesses for Eternatus, and just in case they have a weakness guard energy attached, you also discard a special energy from your opponent's active Pokemon before doing that damage as well. So that's really, really gross. Any discard of special energy can be an upside as well. This isn't only specifically good against Eternatus. It's a 2-prize Pokemon that can hit a reasonable amount of damage. A good amount of decks naturally put down a decent number of V Pokemon, especially if they're VMAX based decks. There's, the VMAX they're setting up. There's the one on the bench. There's the potentially like Crobats and stuff in there as well. So in a lot of situations, Zapdos could even just be used for a 1 attachment, gust up Crobat or gust up to Dene, take 2 prizes, only be putting 2 prizes in the active position for your opponent to deal with as well to try and skew that prize race. So insane Eternatus counter is going to really help the Dragapult and the Shadow Rider decks have a much better game against Eternatus. Even some of the tag team decks can have a much better time against Eterna as well. We have seen in the past Mewtwo Aurora boxes try and use Galarian Farfetch'd, and this Zapdos is far more efficient and easy to weave in at any time and just burst onto the scene. So that could rejuvenate a Mewtwo Toolbox style deck to give you an easy time against Eternatus, and even potentially ADP could go back towards a tag call engine, or just have the thick 4 count of Aurora energy, and finally try and skew that Eternatus matchup more in your favor. That's one of the only thorns in the side of ADP, is that it's always had a slightly negative Eternatus since its release. So yeah, Zapdos covering a lot of bases in what we are expecting to be some of the top decks in the game. And, anything else could just be weaving in Zapdos because it's like just a good card in general if they have the means either from like Viridian or Aurora Energy or anything else like that. So very, very solid card. Not just an Eternatus counter, will be good in other scenarios as well. So excellent all round.
Next up, we have Sandaconda V and VMAX. Sandaconda V has 220 HP, fighting type. Wall of Sand has an ability. This Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks. Again, never nothing to write home about, but at least a little bit of defense. And Land Crush for 2 fighting, and a colorless is 140. Again, nothing crazy. What we're really looking at here, though, is the Sandaconda VMAX. 320 HP. Has the first attack Sand Pulse for 1, does 60 damage and 20 to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So an interesting spread attack. We actually haven't seen spread do too well recently, outside of very targeted spread, i.e. snipe damage from things like Urshifu. This is actually more of a spread per turn kind of effect, which has only really been seen on Orbeetle recently as an ability rather than an attack. So it's interesting to see this kind of attack come back. Similarly, we also have Gmax Cyclone for 180 for 3 energy, which lets you move any amount of energy from your Pokemon to your other Pokemon any way you like. This is where we really see the card shining more than anywhere. Cheryl means that you can use the Gmax Cyclone, do 180, move the energy off of the Sandaconda that may be damaged or maybe is going to get damaged, and then Cheryl off next turn, be able to switch into the other Sandaconda, and kind of rinse and repeat, similar to how we mentioned the Blaziken strategy would work. This is kind of the same thing. You also have things like Stone Energy to help you be a little bit more resistant. Try and really push these into 2, maybe even 3 shots. So if you miss a turn of Cheryl, it's not the end of the world. Obviously, this kind of cute little archetype could work. There's a couple of other interesting VMAXs that kind of can do this thing. We've, as Joe mentioned, we've seen things like Snorlax and Scentercoach do it in the past, and we've got Blaziken in the set. So it'll be interesting to see if any of these style of decks continue to do well. We think this is one of the more interesting ones just because that typing is obviously fantastic as well for dealing with Eternatus. But in general, it's not going to be cracking the meta open too wide. Sand Pulse and that kind of style of deck, I think, even though Orbeetle was fairly successful, Orbeetle's success was off the back of a very, very strong attack as well as an ability. The ability is going to be a similar amount of counters as Sand Pulse, but Orbeetle was also able to be pressuring 150 plus damage for 2 energy per turn at the same time. So your opponent kind of had to deal with the Orbeetle, whereas they don't really need to deal with this Sandaconda. It's only doing 60 per turn. So again, these kind of attacks do lend themselves into each other. Maybe you're just going to be Sand Pulsing every turn and just Cheryling. That strategy works because you can just attach 1 energy. It doesn't matter if you discard it off. And maybe in a later game, you're going to use Gmax Cyclone and kind of do what Orbeetle did, where you're going to spread early game and then try and take prizes and capitalize late game. In general, though, we just don't feel it's overly impressive. It'll probably see some experimentation. That's why I've bumped it up to 2. We think it's definitely worth playing around with. It's an interesting strategy, and both of these attacks, like I say, lend themselves very well into Cheryl. but in general, it's not too exciting. It is worth noting we already have the Sandaconda V from Rebel Clash. Kind of argument as to which one's better. I think personally, Sand Eater is a very, very strong attack, letting you attach an energy to yourself with that first attack, meaning that you can G-Max Cyclone without any kind of acceleration, which the deck typically wouldn't play anyway. So you can. This means you can be a little bit more. You can apply a little bit more pressure. So I think if you are going to lean into that, I think Sand Eater is possibly the better attacker or the better basic V of the two. But in general, it's an archetype that looks quite exciting, looks pretty fun to play, but the amount of damage counters and the kind of awkwardness of having to use Cheryl as your supporter every turn and also continually find switching outs, things like that, is going to be a little bit more awkward than it's worth, and it's not quite going to be worth the payoff that it would be when you could use some of these other just big hitting VMAXs, things like Eternatus and Shadow Rider.
On to some dark types, and we have another Galarian Pokemon. This is Moltres V. It has 220 hit points. It's a dark type, and it has the Dire Flame Wings ability, allowing you to, once per turn, attach a darkness energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon. You can't use more than one Dire Flame Wings ability each turn, but one is enough. This is a really, really good ability. We've seen this on Charging Up Naganadel. Of course, they were stackable, but the premise is the same here. It's on a basic as well, which is just absolutely incredible. It has a Grass weakness, a 2 retreat cost, and also has the Aura Burn attack. For Dark Colorless, you do 190 and deal 30 to yourself. Doesn't sound that good, but when it's self-accelerating, this is actually really easy to just weave in on any turn. If you've done a Dire Flame Wings the previous turn, and then you're already threatening that Aura Burn just by having another discard, using the ability again, and manually attaching. And 190, again, it's an easy boss. It's a KO on a Crobat, it's a KO on a Dedenne, that sort of thing. And in what is primarily going to be 3 prize-based decks, this can be good enough to skew that prize trade. Where I'm most excited for Galarian Moltres is that it's really going to cover one of the 2 main weaknesses of Eternatus in our current format right now. Thanks to having, like 1 or 2 copies of this card and probably 2 to 3 copies of Energy Switch, it means you can do a few different things with Eternatus now much more freely. You can go aggressive and take individual prize KOs on things like Jirachis now, with things like Hooper in the game, because then you're naturally playing E-switches. If Hooper isn't knocked out, or even if it is KO'd, you can use Moltres to reattach that energy and then E-switch onto Eternatus. So you can take a tempo prize with Eternatus now, which it basically never could before. You were always limited to just doing a 30 damage prod, which was very bad for you. Of course, it means you can also miss a turn 1 energy drop on your Eternatus and still get a Dread End off, which is nutty as well. So you can have an even dodgier hand as long as you get that turn 1 Eterna down, you're happy. And also it means you're less Crushing Hammer prone, which is one of the big bugbears of Eterna players, especially if you can't get your early attack off to get extra energies around the board to protect against that. Now you have inbuilt Moltres E-Switch, which is going to be a load off your mind. And I think it really pushes Eternatus to being the full-on beatstick deck. You have the option to go aggressive for 1 prize knockouts with Hooper now and disrupt some Jirachi engines, which I think is a big deal, especially if it's skewing prize trade. It means you really need to do only 1 big Dread End, and then you can work in boss's orders later down the line for a prize map. So that could be absolutely crazy. And the fact that you're just not worried about turn 1 whiffs and hammers, all of that nonsense. You can just hit the ground running, go aggressive, and start swinging for that 270, which is just really, really solid. So Moltres opens up that door. There's also a possibility for a slightly more interesting rogue variant, which is going to be centered around a tag call package and red and blue to try and get Weavile GX into play, using that shadow connection to move your darkness energies around, Moltres being an integral piece so that you can grow your board state to have hopefully enough energies to use the Dark Moon GX attack, which is unironically still one of the most dangerous GX attacks in the game if you get that full effect. The hope is that the Moltres is going to get you there that little bit more than you ever could in the current standard format. And of course, this deck will boast dual typing, where you have Psychic typing and Dark typing. It's more of a Dreamer deck, and we actually have played some games of it already on tabletop, and I think there's a video already on the channel of this archetype where it's unconventional, it's gonna feel clunky at times, but the payoffs with Dark Moon are just really, really delightful and strong, and that could be an interesting option that people also try and build Moltres around, because it's also just an incredible card. It could weave into all sorts of different decks because it's a basic that accelerates to itself, so anything thing could weave in like legitimately an E-switch package, and I'm not going to complain about it too much because it can attack and it can be an E-switch option. Like, it's just a pretty solid card in general, and even its type coverage is dark, so you could play just tech basic energies and then have type coverage against Shadow Rider. So also potentially an air quotes sort of counter to that archetype as well, which is really interesting.
Next up, we have another dark Pokemon, Liepard V. This one is a little bit less universal, but still pretty good. 190 HP dark type with the Hidden Claw ability. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may discard a Pokemon tool from a Pokemon, yours or your opponent's. Then it's also got the Shadow Ripper attack, which does 110 for 3 energy, and you can put this and all cards into your hands. So really we're looking at that Hidden Claw, and basically we're looking at this being a one of in Eternatus. Right now, Eternatus has played Dangerous Drill, it's played Tool Jammer. I don't think it's ever really played Tool Scrapper too heavily, but even if it has, basically Liepard is all 3 of these cards combined that is even more searchable because it's a Pokemon. That's almost all there is to say about the card. It's just very, very good. It means that you can be aggressive with being able to get rid of defensive tools. It can be really good for getting rid of things like rugged helmets and stuff that we discussed in the previous video that, you know, as Joe just mentioned, energy disruption has always been a bit of a bugbear for Eternatus, and even though we are moving towards a situation where maybe it's not anymore, you're never really going to be happy to see those kind of effects in play. So yeah, it's just going to be really, really nice, that nice utility. It's also arguably a plus 30 damage anyway. It's going to be super searchable. It's just a very, very nice card to have. It's not flashy, it's not hype super exciting, it's just very, very good utility, and it means that we don't have to play these awkward cards like Scrapper, Drill, or Tool Jammer anymore, all that have various downsides, as well as having to be or being a little bit more difficult to search out. This is a Pokemon that you can just grab with a quick ball as and when you need it, which is fantastic. So yeah, nothing too much to say about this, just a really, really solid card for Eternatus, and a great option for it to have.
Onto Galarian Slowking V and VMAX. It's a single strike Pokemon. The V is a 220 hit point basic that has weakness to fighting, a 3 retreat cost, and has the first attack Concoction. For 1 colorless, you discard a card from your hand. If you do, draw 3 cards. A little bit of nice consistency there if nothing else is going your way. And you also have the Word of Ruin attack for dark colors. At the end of your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon will be knocked out. Of course, they can retreat out of this or switch out of it, and then it means you've essentially done nothing for 2 energy, which is really bad for you. The VMAX has 320 hit points as a dark type and has the Max Toxify attack. For dark colors, you just do 10 damage, and your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned. During checkup, you put 12 counters on instead of 1. So it's a lot of poison damage. It's essentially 130, but it means that if they stay poisoned, Max Toxify is not gaining you any damage, and there's nothing else really you could be doing. You couldn't even play like Memory Capsule and try and do any damage with the regular V either. So you're pretty much just hoping that poison ticks do the job. And yeah, I think you can ramp this up a little bit, but never too much. If you're playing a dark type Pokemon that's weak to fighting and has a 2 energy attack cost, it has to be Eternatus, because this is so much worse.
Next up, we have Metagross V and VMAX. It's a rapid strike pair. The V has 220 HP and has Bullet Punch as its first attack, which does 20 plus 20 more for each heads on 2 coin flips. Then Synchro Hammer for 2 energy does 60 damage, and if this Pokemon and your opponent's active Pokemon have the same amount of energy attached, this does 90 more damage. So this is 150 for 2. Pretty efficient, but you have to immediately compare this to Zacian, which is doing 220 for 3, 230 for 3, and immediately you're kind of going to be looking towards Zacian already. So hopefully the VMAX has something a little bit spicier. The VMAX has 330 HP, and it has that first attack, Zap Traction. Search your deck for up to 2 cards and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. This is the same as Beak Catch, and in all honesty, Beak Catch is a fantastic attack. It's really, really strong to just search out what you need, kind of force some hand disruption from the opponent if needs be. Unfortunately, because this is a VMAX, they're going to have more time to find these hand disruption tools. One fantastic thing about Cramorant is the fact that you can use its attack on turn 1, and you can really force your opponent to maybe have to play a Marnie on turn 2 when they're going to want to be still trying to set up their board. So by the time you've got this Metagross VMAX out, sometimes they're going to be in a position where they're able to just play a Marnie and it really be no skin off their nose. So it's not quite as strong when it's on a stage 1, but still a pretty decent attack. Max Rush is the second attack on Metagross that does 100 damage for 2, And during your next turn, this Pokemon's Max Rush attack does 150 more damage. So across 2 turns, this is one-shotting a VMAX, because you're going to be doing a total of 350 damage. That's all well and good, but the problem is this damage is it isn't front-loaded, it's back-loaded, which means that you deal 100, and in comparison to something like a Corviknight, that means you're not KOing things like Dedenes, Crobats, all of that stuff. You're not even KOing any of these basic Vs. Both of these attacks will still be 2-shotting VMAXs, but Corviknight can just be used to take prizes immediately, whereas Max Rush really can't. There has been sort of the idea of playing it with something like a Galarian Ponyta, obviously with the Bronzong Saucer Energy like engine. You can kind of play techie attackers, and given that Galarian Rapidash has a colorless attack cost, you can theoretically slap 2 energy on it and use the Galarian Rapidash's attack first to lower their HP down to 100. I believe it's called Libra Horn, and then use Max Rush to take your first 3 prizes, set up for the 250, and then do 250 to something like a tag team or a benched V Pokemon, something like that. But all of a sudden, that sounds quite complicated when we can just attach 1 more energy and do 240 with Corviknight. Corviknight already isn't seeing play. Luke Metal is kind of the defensive metal build of choice. Corviknight sees very, very minimal play here and there, but Luke Metal has really risen up once again in terms of being the defensive metal build of choice, like I say. So unfortunately, this is kind of just a worse Corviknight. It's a little bit flashier. Obviously, you have things like the Rapid Strike tag, which can be somewhat relevant, but even then, you can't use things like Rapid Strike Energy to even use Max Rush in a turn. You still need an extra attachment. So all in all, it's just pretty underwhelming. Some flashy techs, some flashy attacks, but overall worse Corviknight in our eyes.
Onto the colorless types, we have Blissey V, one that I'm actually really interested in. This feels like a really fun build-around style card. It's a 250 hit point colorless basic. Does have an awkward weakness to fighting, but this could potentially be mitigated by weakness guard energy. Has the nice little helpful ability of Natural Cure. Whenever you attach an energy card from your hand to this Pokemon, it recovers from all special conditions. It's a small little bonus that you get on top of this, but the Blissful Blast is the only attack that you have here. It's for 1 colorless and you do 10 damage, plus 30 more for each energy attached to this Pokemon. If you did any damage with this attack, you may attach up to 3 energy cards from your discard pile to this Pokemon. So Blissful Blast starts at 1 for 40, but you can then start all this different plethora of things to make this a lot more reasonable. First of all, you're going to want to play Researches and Dedenes to try and bin off lots of energy cards. Could just be basic energy, but this also can grab back special energy, and there are the potential to play things like Aurora to have a boxy style approach with Bronzong, which I think is pretty interesting. One of the only ways that we've tested it so far in person is that we've tried Zacian, Saucer, and you've worked towards a Beast Game GX attack. The cool thing about the Blissful Blast is that you can use Bronzong to modify that damage so that you put yourself exactly 50 damage away from a Beast Game GX to potentially close the game all in one knockout of a 3-prize Pokemon, which is going to be really fun, and it's going to be a fun challenge for someone to do on PTCGO and get it recorded or whatever, which I think is something that I certainly want to be at the forefront of. There's also the option to play Porygon Z, and you have Crazy Code where you just try and spam a bunch of special energies. Obviously, having Recycles at your disposal means that once Blissey is knocked out, you can immediately attach 4 Recycle energies, so Blissful Blast is at least getting back to 130 damage, which is something for you at least, and then you can re-establish those powerful colorless that hopefully you've searched out. That's the real downside of Blissey. It feels like once one gets knocked out, even if you have committed like 6 or 7 energy up to the front, then Blissey on the bench, even if it has like 2 or 3 energy, it's not a lot of pressure. You spend a turn basically doing nothing to then like re-establish the threat once again. So it means you can't take those like opportunistic prizes with boss's orders or anything like that. You're literally twiddling your thumbs for a turn while you're reloading. That's why we think it's not the higher tier threat, but pretty much the community are in agreement here. It's a colorless attacking Pokemon, there's a lot of acceleration options available, and it's a really flexible card that has a ton of different synergies that are open to it. So maybe someone finds a way to make this work. It's a very chunky card with some really interesting attack text. So yeah, there's something there. It feels like a card that needs to be unlocked, and potentially it becomes a viable archetype. Right now, though, we feel its damage output just isn't quite there on the proactive side.
Finally, we have Tornadus V and VMAX. This is another single strike VMAX. Tornadus V has 10 HP. It's a colorless Pokemon, and the first attack, Blow Through, does 20. And if there's a Stadium in play, it does 20 more damage. Again, a nice little setup attack. You will see that we have Tower of Darkness on the right-hand side, which is typically what you're going to want to have in play. But even because this is all completely colorless, we can even play Martial Arts Dojo and buff that damage up a little bit more, which is pretty cool. Blasting Hammer does 180, and you discard a energy from this Pokemon for 4 energy. That's a lot of energy you need to be able to use this attack, especially given that the damage is only 180 and there is downside in that you have to discard an energy. But we do have Houndoom to help accelerate single strike energy onto this Pokemon, as well as buff that damage up as well. Additionally, we have the Porygon Z powerful energy combo. So it is attainable. It's not quite going to be breaking the bank, but it's not. The 4 attack cost isn't quite as scary as it may seem. The VMAX itself has 320 HP and a blasting wind attack for 60 for 2 energy. Again, nothing particularly special, just going to be used for setting up numbers or taking a KO that you couldn't quite reach with Max Wind Spirit, which does 120, and if there's a Stadium in play, this attack does 120 more. Then discard the Stadium. So for 4 energy, you're doing, in an ideal scenario, 240 damage, which is not quite going to be one-shotting anything outside of V Pokemon. This can be buffed up to at least tag team ranges pretty consistently with things like I say, Houndoom and Single Strike Energy, or the Porygon Z powerful energy combo to hopefully get to tag team range. And even with something like Karen's Conviction or Martial Arts Dojo, we can maybe even just about reach some of the VMAXs. But it's a lot more effort than Single Strike Urshifu, and that's one of the main reasons why we've left this one pretty low. Single Strike Urshifu obviously has that huge downside of having to discard 3 energy, but typically, or all energy, sorry, but typically after you've used that Single Strike attack, you've probably taken surprises with that, and you're hopefully going to be able to take a hit to then use the Tool card to be able to do another big load of damage while setting up a second VMAX. So it's not even that big of a downside having to discard all of your energy on your VMAX. It can be, obviously, it's a massive downside when you think about it, but it's not even the end of the world in certain situations. And the payoff of playing Tornadus and not having to discard those energy, actually that 30 damage is a pretty big deal, because the Single Strike Urshi only just gets into range of 1 prize in most scenarios, of 3 prizes in most scenarios. It needs 3 Single Strike energy to reach 330, which is kind of the number you need to be hitting. Tornadus needs 4 energy modifiers. So between Single Strike energy, powerful energy, dojo, that kind of thing, you do need those modifiers. You do need more modifiers. You also need to have a Stadium in play, and when we have things like Swell in format, that can actually be really difficult, because you're probably going to have to even play a Marshadow of your own just to not be locked out of doing a 120 damage because of a Swell being in play, and you can't play your own Stadium down. Oh no, this is any Stadium. My bad. Okay, so you don't need to. You can still get rid of Swells, but even so, the fact that the damage isn't guaranteed. You're not guaranteed to do 240, and also you don't wall break like Urshifu does. In most scenarios, you're going to be doing less damage and have less utility in general than a Single Strike Urshi. The cost is a little bit less, and obviously you don't have to discard all of that energy, but we think Single Strike Urshi just has a better attack in general. We've seen the engine not be hugely successful in tournaments so far, but it's not terrible, and it looks to really be gaining quite a big buff with some of the strong Single Strike cards coming out in this set, especially this Single Strike package in general. But we don't think Tornadus is going to be the forefront of that when we still have Single Strike Urshi in format, which does more damage and wall breaks, and typically will be able to reach more important numbers without too much of a downside.
So that's it. That's all the V and VMAX Pokemon from the set. In our books, you're really going to want to look for the Shadow Rider, Calyrex V and VMAX. Also, Galarian Zapdos is good in a lot of decks. We're also really high on the Zeraora, the Ice Rider Calyrex, as well as the Galarian Moltres. The remainder, there's some utility here. The Liepard could easily go into any Eternatus deck. Blissey is a fun experimental card that I really implore people who want to have some fun and some trial and error could really get to work with Blissey. And also there's the option of Blaziken being a new way to play Rapid Strike as well. So lots to digest from this set, plenty of exploration, and lots of interesting type mapping going on. So that's going to be a constant tug of war in this format.
Definitely, and there are some fantastic alt arts. If you're not particularly looking to play right now, obviously we've still not got tournaments back just yet. Maybe you just want to go for the collection. Look at some of these arts; they are absolutely fantastic. So make sure you crack open some packs. The set releases this week, which is really exciting. So make sure you look for some packs, support your local game stores, of course, and try and pull some of these really, really nice art cards. But yeah, other than that, thanks so much for watching. Make sure you stay tuned tomorrow for the final part of the set review, where we'll be going over the non-rulebox Pokemon, the one prizes. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you there, as well as upon the set's release in a couple of days' time. Thanks, everyone.